So yeah, a little bit about me. I'm an SEO strategist at Resignal. I've been there for about a year, and before that I worked in-house for a digital marketing team. And then outside of SEO, I'm a bit of a fantasy nerd. I love all things Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. And I'm telling you that because, you'll see why in a second with the theme of my deck. So organic success can often feel a little bit like the journey to Mordor. So long, tiring, stressful, potentially a bit of going around in circles, not very straightforward, but hopefully no near-death experiences. And when it comes to SERP rankings, content alone will not get you to your end goal. So just like Frodo couldn't get the ring to Mordor by himself, you need a combination of things. So you've got your technical SEO in there as well. You need a comprehensive technical SEO strategy in place, and probably a little bit of off-page SEO. Like Gollum can be a little bit toxic if it's not done well, but if it's done well, it's going to help you get there. So with that being said, we're going to cover the following sort of 4 key technical issues to do with your faceted navigation, duplicate content, internal linking, and then finally a bit of an over-reliance on robots.txt files. So straight into the first one, which is an unoptimized faceted navigation indexing strategy. So we all know filtered PLPs are a really important part of e-commerce, particularly for user experience. For many, many reasons. These are just a few of them. So enhanced navigation, really quick and easy segmenting of your products, all those good things that are going to lead to better conversion rates, essentially. But for site architecture, and I've put the word detrimental here, which is perhaps a little bit extreme, but they can be very harmful for your site health if they're not done well. So I've got a couple of examples here. So the first thing is typically one thing that we see quite a lot, which is zero indexing of your filtered navigation. So in this example, we've got pets at home. They've got a really, really great faceted navigation setup, and they've got lots of really helpful user-friendly filters, but they're not indexing any of them. So for example, this page, which is a senior dog food page, has a lot of search volume, currently not getting any visibility in the SERPs because it's not indexable. So even Sauron couldn't see these pages. If you're not a Lord of the Rings fan, please bear with me because there are a lot of these. And then it can also make your assortment a bit harder to manage. So in a lot of cases, the way around this is to create a fixed PLP for the page that you're not indexing as part of your facet. But it's just twice as many places where you need to ensure that your products are assigned properly. So for your product teams, this can cause a bit of an issue as well. In this case, you've got a really good page for kitten food on the Pets at Home site, but it's got a third less products than the filtered version does if you filter on cat food. So your users are seeing a good page, but potentially missing out on a lot of products that they can convert on. Then we've got an example that's kind of the other way. So a bit of an over-indexation, which can cause some index bloat. So B&Q are really, really good with their filtered navigation in terms of using dynamic metadata, but you can apply a lot of filters to these pages, and these are all indexable. So in this case, there's nearly 35,000 index pages here just from the painting facet, which is obviously a lot, and the likelihood of someone searching for something this niche is going to be pretty small. So potentially a lot of index bloat there. So what does Gandalf have to say about this? And if you're not sure who I mean in here, I am, of course, referring to the big man from Google himself, Mr. John Mueller. So he confirmed that having low-quality pages on a site can affect your overall rankings. So not only having index bloat for one facet is going to affect that particular top-level PLP, but it could bring down the rest of your site as well. So it can be pretty harmful. At the risk of over-explaining this just for the sake of Lord of the Rings content, I like to compare this like the Battle of Helm's Deep. So you've got your men and elves, which are like your top-level PLPs, your single-level filters, your really important pages, and then you've got your tens of thousands of Uruk-hai, which are kind of like all your filtered pages that are spawned off of the back of those, which are really great for user experience. There's a reason that this film is rated so highly on IMDb. Because you can't have the battle without them, right? And like same on your website, you need these filtered pages for your user experience, but you don't want them to triumph in the SERPs. You only want your core pages to triumph in the battlefield, basically. So how do you get the right balance? So the best way to do this is to use a bit of a hybrid approach. So rule-based methodology to determine which pages you should index and which pages you shouldn't. So only index filters that are needed to drive traffic organically in the SERPs. Having a multifaceted strategy, so maybe you want to have it where you only have one filter applied at any one time will trigger an indexable page. You might want to go up to 3 potentially, depending on your product range. It might even be more if you've got a huge website, but I'd say as a rule of thumb, typically it'll probably be between 1 and 3. And then you might want to say that if you have, say, like a color filter, which is kind of what Callum was talking about earlier, if you have like a color filter, if you apply 2 colors, that will go to no index, but if you have just one color on there, it would be indexable. So you might want to consider that as well. And then override, so you have certain filters that will never need indexing. So for example, like pricing filters, you don't really want to have them indexable in the SERPs. So just as an example, if you were an e-com site selling skirts, you probably will want to index red skirts. You probably will want to index something like polka dot skirts, maybe even red polka dot skirts, depending on your range and search volumes and opportunities. But once you apply more than one color or more than one pattern, that might be when you want to introduce a no index tag. So filtered pages that you do want indexing should be self-canonical and crawlable with unique metadata. And then the pages that you don't want indexing should utilize no index tags and be canonicalized back to the parent page. I really, really like the way that Dunelm do this, and big shout out to Sam for the way he's implemented this strategy. So they have it where if you apply like a material filter to the page or a color filter, these are all indexable and they use unique data. But if you applied, say, a color and a material, it potentially will go to no index. The same way that if you have sort of like certain types of materials that maybe don't have search demand, they're also no index using non-crawlable parameters in the URL. So they've got a really, really great comprehensive strategy in place to combat this. On to pain point number 2. So this is duplicate content. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a big one for a lot of people. But internal competition between your category pages is pretty common on e-commerce sites, a little bit like the rivalry between Legolas and Gimli in Lord of the Rings. And it's usually due to one of 2 reasons. So either you've got identical filtered pages accessible via multiple different avenues, or not using unique metadata and on-page content on your category pages. So looking at the first one a little bit, say you were a sportswear company selling men's basketball shoes, you're probably going to have a top-level PLP for men's, probably going to have a top-level PLP for basketball, and then probably one for shoes too. And then depending on the way you apply your filters, you could have up to 6 different ways of triggering essentially what is the same page. If you've got your facets open to indexing, these could potentially all be indexable and causing duplication on your site. We've gone a bit off theme with the Harry Potter gif here, but it just worked pretty well. So the ways that you would fix this is firstly use redirects, so to ensure that only the primary page is indexable. So identify what your primary page is. You're going to want to look at your SERP traffic, your rankings, see which pages are being indexed and favoured by Google in Search Console. If you've got a fixed PLP, it probably will be that, but not always, so just make sure you check the data. And then redirect all your other filters to that page via 301s. And if you can, replace your internal links that they point just to the correct URL. And then the second phase of that is to canonicalize the secondary filtered pages and set these as no index. I think it's really good to do this just as a fail-safe, because especially if you can't replace all of your internal links on the page, Google might still discover these URLs. So even though you're redirecting them, it's still good to canonicalize them and no index them. And then the second issue that we had for duplication was not utilizing unique metadata or on-page content. So the way around this is typically going to be to use syntax rules to tweak your metadata dynamically. You can usually do this based on search refinements. Depending on your CMS, there'll be some kind of elements probably that you can apply a rule on, or your technical developers can do that to make sure that this generates dynamically from page to page. I'm not really going to go super into pagination, but you should do this for paginated pages as well. So your paginated pages typically should be self-canonical because Google uses these to discover other product pages. It's pretty good at identifying what a paginated page is, but if you can add it into your meta titles, it's just an extra signal to your search engines. And then ensure that these filters that you do have set as indexable don't inherit content blocks from the top level page. That's also really important, because if you've got a content block on the top one and you've got a couple hundred, potentially more, filtered pages spawning off of that, if they've all got the same content blocks, that's going to flag as duplication as well. I really like the way that Argos do this. So you can see here they've got a page for early learning toys. They've got a really nice content block on there, unique metadata. It's self-canonical. And then if you apply a filter, say, of an age range, the H1 changes, the meta title changes, and the content block is removed. So really good signals there. And they do the same for pagination. They just tweak the page title to have the page number in there, just an extra signal to Google. And then on to pain point number 3. So this is an ineffective internal linking structure. So we all know that crawlers use internal links to discover URLs on your site. In fact, going back to John Mueller, he said that this is the single best way to highlight important pages on a website is using your internal links. Again, we're talking about a little bit about PageRank here, but Gary from Google also said that the using links is a really good way of spreading authority throughout your site. Gandalf was taken, so we've given him Elrond. But so it's therefore very important that you get this right within your site architecture. And again, typically 2 things that we see here that cause issues. The first one is your faceted navigation strategy linking into all those filtered URLs that trigger thousands of unique links. So I've got an example here from Decathlon. They are really good at spotting duplicate pages on their site and canonicalizing them to the right ones. But in their faceted nav and in some cases their mega menu as well, they're pointing to those duplicates rather than the canonicalized versions. So it's just sending conflicting signals to your search engines, and then it's going to potentially confuse them, and they're not going to know which ones are actually the right page, especially if you've got a link coming from your mega menu, which is going to be on pretty much every page on your site. And then the second thing that we typically see is when you've got your category pages linking into product pages that contain either URL slugs from the category page or parameters at the end. So again, we're using Decathlon here, but all of their product pages being linked to contain an MC number at the end, which is a part of a parameter. I'm guessing something to do with Merchant Center, but either way, it's not necessary for the URL for the user to access this page. And it's canonical to a URL without that on there. And as a result, they've got over 62,000 duplicate indexed product pages because of that way that they're linking from their PLPs. So the way to sort of tackle this is to try where you can only to point to canonical URLs within your website. So if you can drop those parameters and the PLP slugs from your URLs, you should try and do that. And kind of goes without saying, but prioritize your primary pages in your internal linking strategy. The more links a page has, the more important Google is going to think it is. So just make sure you point into the correct ones. Now, I know it's very easy to say that. It depends on your CMS functionality as to how much control you have over where you're pointing to. A little bit like how Frodo and Sam couldn't just fly the eagles to Mordor. You might not just be able to replace all of your links. So there's a couple of ways you can get around that. The first one is using uncrawlable symbols in your URLs, such as the hash symbol. John Mueller said that they typically ignore everything after the hash in a URL when they're crawling. So if you really need, say, something in there for your tracking perspective, or you need to have your filters still available for your users to be able to access these pages, but you don't want them indexed, you could take advantage of the hash symbol in your URL. This will mean Google won't see it, it won't try and index it, it won't try and crawl it, and actually it will crawl just up to the hash. So all of your internal link juice basically will go to that URL before the hash starts, so you're still spreading link equity to the right pages. The other way that you can do this is serving your links via non-Ahref elements, so potentially using Ajax, which is asynchronous JavaScript XML. So it's basically just loading your links without triggering a page refresh and without using an href tag in your hard code. This means that Google won't see it, it won't follow it, and it's just not going to point any signals into saying it should crawl these pages. I really like the way that Sports Direct do this. They have, for filters that they don't want indexed, they do both these things. So if you try to filter on like any of their shoes pages, for example, on a size, you'll see that there's a hash symbol in the URL. And if you were to inspect the hard code, you'd see that they're not using any href tags. So Google's not following these links. And then my final pain point today is on an over-reliance on robots.txt files. So we typically see a lot that companies fill their robots files with a lot of blocking to prevent Google from crawling these pages. But Google actually recommends in more than one place that you should use on-page directives to implement these no index tags rather than your robots file. And you definitely, if you're doing one, if you're using on-page directives, you shouldn't also block in your robots file. We often see a lot of overfilled files. So for example, this is the Adidas robots file. It's just a snippet. It's actually a lot bigger than this. And they're blocking a lot of PLPs from being crawled here, which is quite unnecessary because Adidas actually have a really, really, really good faceted navigation approach. Like I think Callum used Adidas earlier in his talk. And they do this really well. So a lot of this is quite unnecessary. The reasons why you shouldn't do this is that a robots file is a suggestion to a crawler. It's not a command, so Google isn't going to take this as fact. It might not even follow it. And it prevents crawling, basically, so it's not going to prevent indexing. So all you're essentially doing with the robots file is telling Google not to crawl that page. When you do that, it's stopping it from seeing vital information about the page. So if you are canonicalizing the page to something else, if you are setting the page as no index, Google's not necessarily going to see that if it's blocked in the robots file and it can't crawl it. And that can lead to bucket indexing of URLs. And the URLs that are indexed will display very little information because Google just can't see it, basically. So we had to get a you shall not pass reference in here. So robots.txt versus Googlebot is a little bit like Gandalf versus the Balrog. You're basically telling it that it can't pass, it can't access those URLs. But just like the Balrog does get Gandalf, Google will still see your pages, essentially. So it's probably not going to work. And just to prove that, if you look back at Adidas, just searching one of the parameters that they're blocking in their robots file has triggered, and this is probably a big one to be fair, but there's over 8 million results there from one URL slug that they're trying to block. And you can see in the results that you're getting no information about the pages, and it's because they're blocked in the robots and they've got no index tags, so Google just can't, it can't do its job, basically. So where possible, use on-page directives instead of your robots file to try and prevent indexing and crawling. Canonicalize the pages to the most accurate. So this is typically going to be the parent, but if you've got an alternative PLP, then it might be that one. And remove any commands in your robots file that are preventing crawling of that page. And you should be able to just watch the number of index results blocked drop in the SERPs. So we did see some improvements for a couple of our clients where we'd basically stripped back their robots files and we just focused on-page directives instead. And now their search console dashboards are nice and clean and they've got minimal index bloat. I know what a lot of people are going to say to me at this point, and that is, what about your crawl budget? So going back to John Mueller, he confirmed that basically if you start no indexing a pattern of URLs, Google isn't going to keep periodically trying to crawl these. Google's pretty smart, and it will understand that if you're no indexing these URLs, it doesn't need to crawl them, and it will eventually drop this off. So you shouldn't be too concerned about your crawl budget by taking them out of the robots file and using your on-page directives instead. So just to summarize, utilize a hybrid approach to faceted navigation indexing. So don't zero index, don't over index, do a little bit of both, take advantage of some rules there. Ensure that your duplicate pages are minimized using unique content where you can, and meta tag directives. Link only to the priority canonical PLPs within your website structure. If you can't do that, then definitely take advantage of those non-crawlable parameters like your hash symbols or AJAX loading to serve your URLs. And scale back your robots file and allow your no index tags and your canonical tags to do what they're meant to and do their job. And hopefully you should see some improvements in the SERPs. Thank you very much, and thank you for enduring all of my Lord of the Rings gifts and stuff.